Welcome back to my channel, guys. My name is Prince Tlali, and this is True Crime and Chill. Welcome. Hi. If you are new here, my name is Prince Tlali, and this is True Crime and Chill, where I come to tell you guys about some of the most shocking crime cases in South Africa. So, if you would like to keep on hearing from me every week and you'd like to keep on having what kind of upload I have for you, why don't you go ahead and just hit that subscribe button and like the video, and also comment down below what you think after watching this video. If you think maybe the suspect should have been given more, if you think maybe justice was served, if you think maybe something else should be done, just comment down anything that you may be feeling, anything that you may be thinking at that point. I would very much appreciate your support for my channel. But without any further ado, let's just go ahead and dive into what I have for you today. So this week's true crime case is one of the most heartbreaking things I could have ever heard about. And I just cannot believe that people out there could be so heartless that they would actually do something like this. But if there's anything to learn from last week's case, which I will link down below, is that, people can be so evil and vile and they would stop at nothing to destroy other people's lives. So, yeah, but get ready for this one, guys. This is going to be some of the most, and it's going to be one of the most heartbreaking things you could have ever heard about. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about one of the most sweet looking baby boys you could have ever seen, and his name was Taegrin Morris. I do hope that I pronounced his name correctly, but if I didn't, please do forgive me. So Taegrin, or Tiger as his family used to call him, was born in 2010, and he was only 4 years old at the time of the event that took his sweet and innocent life. And it seriously breaks my heart to see such an innocent soul having their life taken away the way his life was. So really, again, I just cannot believe that some people out there could be capable of doing anything like this. So Tigran was a little dreamer from what I've read about him. There wasn't a lot of information out there about him, but about the kind of kid he was. But what I did gather up from the small piece that I found was that Tigran was really a dreamer. Even at a young age, he already had dreams of his life. He already knew what he wanted to do, what he wanted to be. And he even went as far as telling one of his teachers that someday he was going to marry one of his classmates and they were going to live together and have a house together. I don't even know how it is possible for a 4-year-old to say those kind of things, but Tigran was a little bit of a dreamer, and he was way ahead of his age, if I should say so myself. So that's the kind of kid that he was, and you could tell that he was just going to be one of the most amazing kids that we could have ever had in this country. So Tigran had a dream, right? And his dream was to become an engineer. It was mentioned that he would love to take apart his toy cars to see how they worked. He loved to put them back together. He wanted to know the mechanical side of cars. He was very intrigued, very fascinated by cars. And because of this, he always mentioned to his parents that he wanted to become an engineer. So at just 4 years old, that's how much this kid was so amazing. At just 4 years old, he already spoke about wanting to live in Germany. He wanted to go live in Germany and work on cars, and he wanted to, have his own workshop where people might come and see his creations. And if you and I know a little bit about cars, we both know that a lot of famous car brands are German car brands. So you can tell that Tigran knew his stuff. He knew exactly what he was talking about because he wanted to go live in Germany. And he said that once he gets there, he wanted to open up his own workshop, design his own cars, and have people come to his workshop just to see what he had made. So this kid was just a little dreamer. He was a sweet little big dreamer, and it's just amazing what he thought of at such a young age. So it was said that Tigran shared this passion of cars with his father. So you can see where he took it from. And Tigran was the son of Elwin and Chantel Morris, who had been married for 10 years. And they had a house together in Delmore Park, which was about 5 kilometers from where they both grew up. And in the 10 years of their marriage, this is when they decided to build their family by having their firstborn, a daughter by the name of Erin Morris, And so Taegrin was their second born child. They were just a tight-knit family. They were a tight-knit family that lived in a middle-class suburb. And it was said that they decided to move from where they came from to the suburb so that they can at least try to give their kids a much better life than the life that they had. So you can tell that they were very considerate parents who wanted nothing but the best for their kids. Because Elwin went on to say that he didn't want his kids to grow up having gangsters and criminals as role models. So you can tell the kind of environment that they grew up in, the kind of environment they came from, and they did not want this for their kids. So they moved away to try to give them a better life, to try to give them a chance at a much better future. They went as far as creating a savings account for both Aaron and Taegrin so that when they grow up, they can have the kind of support they would need to, pursue their dreams. So you can tell that Elwin and Chantel were the kind of parents who were going to be a very strong support system for their kids. But now let me go ahead and dive into what really happened on the day of the 19th of July in 2015. So on this day, Chantel and her daughter Erin and Taegrin were leaving her mother's house at around 7:30 at night on that Saturday night. And they did not expect anything like this to happen because it happened so fast. They just couldn't see it coming. Because as they were getting ready to leave, three guys came up to the car with guns, attempting to hijack the car, and they were pointing guns at them, and one of them pointed a gun at Chantel, screaming that they're going to take the car. And of course, Chantel had to think about the safety of her kids. So as she did this, she wanted to give them the car like they wanted to have it. So, but the first thing that she wanted to do was take her kids out of the car because, of course, she's not going to try to fight off three guys who have guns. They were going to try to hurt them. They were going to try to hurt her kids. So because of this, she just wanted to let them have the car as long as she could just take her kids and take them to safety. As she was doing this, Erin jumped out of the car, but of course, Chantel had to take her youngest son out of the car, Taegrin, out of the car, and Taegrin was sitting behind the driver's seat of their VW Golf GTI. So as Chantel was trying to take out Taegrin out of the seat, out of the back of the car, she had no idea that the worst was about to happen to her son that day. She just could not see any of what happened coming because really what's about to happen next was just very brutal. It was very unexpected and it was so heartbreaking. As you would probably know, when thieves try to hijack a car, they want to get out of there as fast as possible. They want to leave so that no one could see them, so they could possibly identify them and call the police out on them someday. So these guys were in a hurry. They wanted to leave as fast as possible. And Chantel was still trying to get her kids out of the car. She was still trying to get Taegrin in specific out of the car. So as she was trying to get him out of the car, these guys just couldn't give her any more time to get her son out of the car, her 4-year-old little boy out of the car. And what happened was she wanted to unbuckle the seatbelt of Taegrin, but his leg ended up being entangled on the seatbelt. So she wanted to get it free to free his leg from the seatbelt. And as she was trying to do this, these guys just did the worst thing ever. They took off with the car at top speed. And as they did this, Taegrin was snatched out of Chantel's arms and the car just went away with him. And as it did this, it dragged him along the hard road and he kept on just being swung around and hit in the back of the wheel of the car. This was a VW Golf GTI, and it was said that at that time, it could reach speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour in just 6.9 seconds. So you can imagine how fast that car was going. And now here's this 4-year-old boy being dragged along the road with the car moving at a high speed. So you can imagine how terrified he was. You can imagine how Chantel was feeling at this point because her baby boy was just snatched out of her arms and it felt like she couldn't do anything about it, but it was said that she tried to run after the car. She was screaming out his name. She was screaming for him as she tried to hold on to him. But unfortunately, you cannot run after a car that's moving at that kind of speed. So when this happened, it was said that it happened on the dark street of Sunny Street. and it was said that this street had no street lights. There were no street lights, and the light that mostly came onto the street was the light that was coming from the houses on the street, and even that light wasn't really enough to brighten up the street. And apart from that, the street also got some light, a little bit of some light from the light towers of the townships that were nearby. So you can tell that it's very easy for a car to get hijacked. It's very easy for someone to try to hijack a car or to try to do anything in this kind of street if it's really that dark, because there weren't a lot of people at this time. It was still winter. There were not a lot of people on the streets to try to help out. So it was very easy for someone to just come and try to hijack a car. As these guys were trying to speed away with the car, a man who was traveling with his daughter, who was driving around with his daughter, a man by the name of Johannes, and his daughter Shanita, were going to visit some family in Daisy Street. And as they were doing this, they were passing by Sunny Street. And when they did, Johannes said that he just saw the car speeding into Sunny Street. He saw the car just speeding around in Sunny Street. And when he did this, he said that he saw something on the side of the car just flapping around, just swinging around. And he couldn't, at first, he couldn't make out what it was. But his daughter Shanita ended up seeing exactly what was on the side of the car. And that's when she screamed out that that is a baby boy. That's a baby right there flapping on the side of the car. So when Johannes looked closely enough, he also saw the same thing, that Taegrin was being dragged on the road while this car was just speeding around, trying to get away as fast as possible. So at that time, Johannes was driving his Toyota Conquest, and as he saw the car, as he saw that Taegrin was being dragged along the road as the car was speeding away, it was said that he also tried to race after the car to try to see what was really happening. And when he did this, another white taxi also sped after the car along with him, trying to see what was happening, trying to find a way to get the boy away from the car. But as they were trying to do this, the car, I think the hijackers ended up seeing that, okay, there are two cars. There's a car and a taxi coming right after us. And as they did this, as they saw, they ended up accelerating even more. They increased the speed, and as they did this, as they went up the road, both Johannes and the white taxi just couldn't catch up to the car. And as soon as they got at the top of the road, they just couldn't see the GTI anymore. It was nowhere to be seen. Once the car ended up leaving Sunny Street, it went into Huadahuab Avenue. And as it was doing this, it was headed towards a 63-year-old man by the name of Andrew Vari. Andrew was driving his car as well, going to the airport to fetch his daughter. Andrew said that he just saw the lights of the car just coming by behind him at such high speed that him and another car ended up moving over to the side of the road to just give some room so the GTI can just pass by as quickly as possible. That's how fast these guys were going. And as the car went by him, he said that he heard something like a screaming cat. But when it got close enough, he heard that it got even more louder. And as he tried to see what was really happening, he decided to also race after the car to try to see what's really happening. And at that time, he was driving a 22-year-old Nissan Skyline. So he was trying to chase after this GTI as much as he can. But again, he also couldn't catch up to them. They ended up accelerating even further. And when they did this, even Andrew ended up losing the car. So now it had been two attempts that were done to try to stop these guys from doing whatever they were doing. But unfortunately, at both attempts, it was just failure. They just couldn't stop them, and they just couldn't save this boy's life. So as things were happening like this, Taegrin's father, Elwin, ended up being notified of what was happening. And when he knew what was happening, he called as many people as he could to try to get some help. He also tried to call radio stations. And when he did, a lot of people responded very quickly, saying that they saw the car moving past the shopping mall of Rega Park and it was moving into Boxburg. So you can just try to imagine how frantic, how scared, how terrified and traumatized his parents were. Taegrin's parents were, both Elwin and Chantel, because they were just being. Chantel experienced this firsthand, and Elwin got to be told about it over the phone. That, listen, something very terrible just happened to your son. So you can imagine how traumatized this whole thing must have been to them. So there was a building. There was a building that was empty for a couple of years. But now this building was being taken over by homeless people and drug addicts. And one of them was a man by the name of Hilton Williams. And Hilton lived in that building for a couple of years. Hilton said that as he was sitting near the window, a broken window, trying to sit around a fire that night, he heard the car pull up at a parking lot just near the building. And then he saw two men coming out of the car wearing white overalls, and they both took out some guns. The two guys, I don't know about the third one because at first it was said that there were three guys involved in this case. So Hilton said that he saw two guys. Maybe he didn't see the third one, but he said he saw two guys coming out of the car, and these guys ended up looking up and seeing that Hilton was looking at them, and one of them ended up saying, "Listen, man, we gotta hurry up. People are watching us." At this point, I don't know if they were seriously aware that Taegrin was still strapped to the side of the car. I don't know if they were aware that they had just they were dragging him along the road the entire time as they were trying to get away. But maybe they were aware. Maybe that's why they ended up leaving the car there in the first place. But I don't think they were, because it wasn't said that they tried to do anything about it, or that they even were aware that he was strapped to the side of the car by the seatbelt. So they decided to abandon the car. And as they did this, they decided to walk by near the building, the abandoned building, and they walked into a lakefront, and they made their way into the R21 highway. But if they were not aware that they were dragging Taegrin along the road, then what was the point of them hijacking the car if they were just going to abandon it? I just, that's my question. Like, what was the point if they were just going to hijack the car and then leave it there at the side of the building? Or maybe like, or did they feel like they dragged too much attention to themselves? Since there had been like a car, a taxi, and another car that tried to race after them, maybe to try to save Taegrin's life. Maybe they felt like they had brought too much attention to themselves. So maybe that's why they decided to abandon the car. Let me know what you think. But I think it's really strange that they just, hijacked the car just to abandon it near some abandoned building. All this time, Chantel was still trying to run after the car. She was still running after the car, trying to, save her son's life. And as she was doing this, she was joined by Taegrin's cousin. His name was Jaden, and then she was also joined by a friend of hers. Johannes ended up joining them as well. And if you remember, Johannes is the guy who tried to chase after the car the first time around but couldn't keep up with it. So he also ended up joining Chantel, Jaden, and Chantel's friend as well. But it wasn't said how or where exactly he decided to join up with them. Somehow they got word that the car was abandoned at the abandoned building that I just spoke about. And as they were all heading towards this abandoned building, Johannes ended up saying to Chantel's friend that he thinks that at this point, Taegrin is not even alive anymore. And if you and I were to really think about it, at this point, it really was, it could have been the case, because the boy was dragged along the road for so long at such high speed that it wasn't even possible that I don't think anyone would still be alive at that point. So Johannes said that to Chantel's friend, but they were still headed to the building anyway to try to see if the boy could still be alive. But unfortunately, as they got to the building, they did find out that the boy was already dead. And then moments later, the police were called onto the scene. And when they came, they tried to keep people away from the scene as much as possible. So I cannot even imagine how, like, that the state that Taegrin was in. I cannot even imagine, the way Chantal felt at that point. I cannot even imagine how the entire situation was looking at that point. Everything must have just felt so dark, so terrible, that something like this had to happen to a 4-year-old boy who did nothing wrong to anyone. As the police were trying to keep everyone else away from the scene, they did allow Elwin and Chantal to go on and see their son. And as they did this, Chantal just couldn't hold it, and she was devastated, of course. Anyone would be. And she just sat on the parking lot. And then later on, when she was at her house in Delmo Park, it was said that the only thing that she said was that she just couldn't hold on to him. She tried, but she just could not hold on to him. So you can tell that Maybe she was even trying to blame herself for what happened. Maybe she felt like she just could have tried to hold on a little bit longer and she could have freed him. But, that's how devastated she was by the entire thing. Even though the criminals had gotten away with this, they had gotten away at this point, they managed to run away. The family had something much more important to worry about, and that was the funeral of Taegrin Morris. And it was said that at Taegrin's funeral, tens of thousands of people came by in buses and motorcycles and on foot. So a lot of people came to support the family. They came to lay the boy in his final resting place. And it was just, it was so heartbreaking to the community of Rega Park, that something like this could have happened to an innocent boy who did nothing wrong to anyone. So people came by in numbers to support the family and to just make sure that Taegrin was laid in his final resting place in peace. So as Taegrin was being lowered into the ground, Elwyn went on to whisper to him that he loves him, and the entire time Chantel was just pressing her head against Elwyn, and the whole time there were just cameras all over surrounding them. They were just like, I cannot even imagine the pain of a parent, the pain that a parent must feel when they have to bury their own child. And that's how terrible this entire situation was. So now that the police were investigating this, the objective was to try to identify who those guys were who came and hijacked the car. And what came into my mind was whether anyone else besides Hilton at that abandoned building could have possibly seen something. Because surely it couldn't just have been him at that building. So I was asking myself that kind of question, like couldn't there have been anyone else who could have seen something, maybe a little bit closer, who could try to identify who these guys were or how they looked like? Because the only thing that Milton saw was that these guys were wearing white overalls and they were carrying guns. I don't think he really saw their faces, but that's all that he saw. But couldn't there have been just like anyone else, anyone who could have seen like what these guys maybe looked like? That's the question that I was asking myself. A few months after this whole thing happened, on October 28th of 2014, it was reported that a suspect had been arrested, an arrest had been made, and a 32-year-old man who was unidentified was arrested because they believed that he had a connection in this crime. So he was arrested, and finally people were starting to see some hope that someone finally got arrested for this. So maybe the other guys who were involved as well could also be caught. So then the spokesperson of the police ended up reporting that this man did get identified, positively identified as one of the people who were involved in this crime. And again, it was revealed that three guys were involved in this crime. So now the other question was where the other two were. That was now the other objective, to try to find out where the other two guys who were involved in this were. But the first guy had been arrested and he was positively identified as one of the people who were involved in this crime. It was confirmed that the suspect will be appearing in court the following day on the 29th of October in 2014. And since the other two guys were still at large, the other two suspects were still being hunted, the police urged the public to try to give out any information that they may know on these guys, anything that they could have seen, anything out of the ordinary that they could have seen. And I think it should have been a little bit easy for people to have seen something that night, even if it was at night. I mean, these guys were identified to have been wearing white overalls. So maybe they did give out a description of these guys, like what they were wearing, but the police were urging the public to come forward with any information they may have. And you know that in these kind of cases, when the police have to go to the public to ask for any help, of course, they put out a reward to try to encourage people to come forward with any information that could lead to the arrest of the suspects. And so because of this, a reward of 100,000 Rand was put out for the information that could lead to the identification and arrest of the two suspects. So now the 32-year-old man who was arrested for this was facing charges of hijacking and murder. And it was said that on that day, on the day of the trial, it was so packed that even the media was there. That's how much packed the court was on that day. People came by to support the family. people came by to try to see this man and try to ensure that justice was being served on that day. And outside the court, people also gathered, a crowd of people also gathered, and they were wearing t-shirts that said enough is enough. And what they did was they also stood in a circle to pray that justice was served for the poor and innocent soul of Taegrin Morris. And as one man in the crowd was being interviewed, he said that it had been a long time coming and it was months of crying out for justice and praying that something could happen. So now the public was glad that someone was being held responsible for this, that someone was caught, and that justice was going to be served for the murder of Tigray. Even though I couldn't find out the name of the suspect who was arrested, it was said that he was arrested on a Tuesday in Katlehong. So I'm guessing that it was the week before the court case started, but he was arrested in Katlehong. But unfortunately, I couldn't find out if he ended up being formally charged with hijacking and murder, as in like if he ended up being found guilty or if he ended up being found not guilty. There wasn't a lot of information out there about this case because in 2017, I read up that the Maurice family ended up coming forward saying that they were still waiting for justice to be done for their son. And they even went on to say that they did end up going back to the police to give out even more information on who they think these people were. These people could have been who were involved in this, but still there were no leads. And because of this, no further arrests had been made. But in my personal opinion, I really think that if any justice had been served, and if any formal charge had been laid, if any charge of guilt had been laid, I think that even the 32-year-old suspect who was arrested could have served some time in prison. But I don't think it really happened like that. Otherwise, it would have been mentioned somewhere. I would have seen it. But maybe he did get arrested, and I just couldn't find out more about it. But in my personal opinion, I find it really hard to believe that anything could have happened at that point. That any sentencing happened. Maybe they found out that there were not enough evidence. Maybe he was found not guilty of the charges, but I really don't think that he ended up serving any time in prison for the crime. Rumors did go around that, the people of the community did end up spreading some rumors that they think that the people who did this could have been people who are known in that community. They could have been people who were part of that community. And police did end up trying to, follow up on these rumors. They treated them as leads, but they still couldn't lead them anywhere. And because of this, still no arrests were made, and the case was starting to get a little bit cold at this point. So, unfortunately, guys, the case was never solved. The case of who murdered 4-year-old Taegrin Morris was never really solved. And because of this, Elwin did say that he was worried that if these guys are still out there, they could do the very same thing that they did to another family. And in my opinion as well, I'm thinking of the same thing, that if these guys were never caught, if these guys will never be caught, they could end up doing the same thing. Who knows? Maybe they did do the same thing again to another family in another way, but that was Elwin's concern, and it was my concern as well, in my opinion. But it's really tragic what happened to the Maurice family. It's very tragic what happened to them, and I hope that someday justice will prevail for Taegrin Morris, because this 4-year-old boy did nothing to anyone. He was a good boy who had dreams of his own, who wanted to become an engineer, who wanted to live in Germany, a boy who just wanted to live his life, who wanted to be happy with his family, and he was just taken away way too soon. He did not see anything else. He did not experience life at all. So because of this, it's really tragic what happened to him, and I hope that these guys will one day be caught for what they did. So yeah, guys, that's the case of Taegrin Morris. I am so sorry to the family for what happened to their baby boy. Again, I hope that someday justice will be served. This really, it's one of the most heartbreaking things that could ever happen. It's seriously unbelievable just how evil some people could be. And because of this, things like this happen, and sometimes they happen to the most innocent of people, the most good-hearted of people, the most good-hearted of families. And we could never really know what goes off in the mind of a person to do something like this, but they end up doing it, and sometimes they do get caught, but sometimes they don't. And that's just the world that we live in, and I'm terribly sorry for that, and I'm terribly sorry to the family for what happened. So yeah, guys, if you did end up making it to the end of the case, I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you chilling with me this week to hear about the case that I had for you. And again, please keep yourselves safe out there. Be safe, love yourself, live your life the best way you possibly can. And I would appreciate it if you supported my channel by subscribing to the channel and also liking the video and commenting down below what you think about the case. I know that it definitely broke my heart to learn that something like this happened to a 4-year-old boy who did nothing wrong to anyone. But yeah, guys, like I said, my name is Prince Tlali, and I will see you guys again next week when I upload another video. So stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next week. Have a great one.